Everybody, this is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and these are your horoscopes for the month of February 2019. So this is the Sun and Rising sign horoscope for Scorpio. All right, let's go ahead and take a look. So it's a pretty big month. The new year is not is no joke. We've got a lot of intense astrology in January. There's a lot more coming this month of February. Most of it's coming from Mars this month, the god of war, which is your ruling planet. That means that, in a sense, I always find that for Aries and Scorpio, if it's a big Mars month, it's not necessarily, even if it sounds dramatic or intense, you handle that very well as a Mars-ruled sign. And so I think your ability to thrive this month is more pronounced than a lot of the other signs. But let's talk about what this looks like. So Mars in Aries around February 2nd from your 6th house will be making a square to Pluto in your 3rd house. First of all, it can indicate that there are challenges or struggles around siblings. The 3rd house is a place of siblings, and the 6th house was traditionally a place that had to do with conflicts and difficulty and bad fortune. And so any kind of conflicts or difficulties around siblings this month may be a theme. However, you could also see a theme of mental or communicative agitation in general. So the 3rd house is often associated with communication. Again, the 6th house is associated with hardships and difficulties. In a general sense, it's sometimes best to think about the 6th house in that way. The 6th house can also be a practical house, kind of day-to-day work house, where there are people that you're hiring or people that work for you. Or it can be related to drudgery and labor, or even sickness and chronic disease. But generally speaking, the 6th house just brings that kind of that flavor of in it more of an embattled feeling. So the Mars theme coming to bear on the 6th house is very natural. The 6th house was traditionally called the joy of Mars. So, and again, this is not like you have a way of moving through life in the intensity of life in stride. That's what it means to be a Mars-ruled sign. You're kind of in your element in the more confrontational elements of life. But when you hit Pluto, Lord of the Underworld, in the 3rd house of the mind, communication, siblings, it does have the potential to be a more combative month around communication and relationships, sometimes siblings in particular, but just maybe feeling a more intense mental or intellectual drive this month in general. Of course, you want to be careful that you don't overpower or harm other people through your speech or through a sharp tongue or something like that. The potential for there being a little bit more hostility is there. So be careful of that. The other thing is that the 3rd house generally has to do with those kinds of the things that we're obligated to that have to do with home and family, or so siblings, but also anyone that we're sort of bound to in the sense of neighbors and community. And the 3rd house in the ancient world had a lot to do, for example, with local religious customs, meaning folk or common everyday expectations that guide our life. Like if you live in my neighborhood growing up in northern Minnesota, where they're getting blasted with 50 below weather right now, which happened to me once when I was growing up, minus 70 with the wind chill, and they closed school, I remember. But if you lived in a small town in Minnesota like I did, there were kind of local expectations of behavior in my little town. It's kind of the norm, the norms that define or dictate action and behavior around where you live and everyday life. And sometimes what comes with that are expectations that we're bound to by kith and kin, by family, by the local niche that we live in. And this month has the potential to be about a conflict therein. a conflict with a neighbor, a conflict with family obligations or expectations that are put on you, a conflict with siblings, a conflict within your local sphere of activity. And it might be more intense. Mars Pluto does not mess around. It's a combination that leads to confrontation and catharsis. So watch for that. But then you'll notice that there's another intense moment that builds from that one and may be more decisive and may represent something of a breakthrough around February 12th and 13th, when Mars gets together in a conjunction with Uranus. So that's a planet of rebellion and defiance and sudden unexpected events. That one, coming off from the Mars-Pluto dynamic, it seems to indicate that there's some kind of breakthrough that's coming this month. It may be difficult. It may require a little bit of conflict, but ultimately it has the feeling to me of needing to break free from something. So getting out of something oppressive or throwing off some form of oppression and maybe needing to stand up for yourself or take a stand about something. I get that kind of feeling from this transit. So don't be surprised if there are there's difficult news this month, or you're feeling more mentally agitated, or again, there's conflict around home roots and sort of family obligations or expectations, siblings. And then if there's some, greater unexpected jolt of change or newness that comes around the 12th or 13th. So let's go backward now and look at another big transit at the start of the month. I think it has a lot to do with family, again, because the new moon on February 4th falls in your 4th house of home, family, and property. So planting a seed and in the house of home and family and domestic matters, and really emphasizing those things in the month ahead as well. Now, if you go forward, a couple of other transits that are worth pointing out. One of them is, here we go. On February 14th, Mars will enter the sign of Taurus and move into your 7th house of relationships to stay for the next 40 plus days. So there's also whatever shift or breakthrough is happening, it may also lead to or be a part of a sequence of events that starts moving into the sphere of your relationships around Valentine's Day. This is not the easiest place for you because Mars is your home planet, but it's in your opposite sign of Taurus, of the Venus sort of peace-loving sign. So the issue of stability and instability in relationships, doing the same old thing versus changing things up, issues around wanting to join with someone very deeply, but how do you stay independent in spirit while giving yourself to someone? Issues about independence and dependence in general. And again, maybe confrontation and power struggles in relationships. For the next 40 plus days, the god of war, your home planet, is working through the relationship house. And, it's not like for Scorpios and for Aries, being a Mars ruled sign, relationships are always about the power balance. So that may also be pronounced and may play a role in the development of the themes this month. That Mars, your home planet, right after this kind of cathartic moment with Uranus, a liberating moment, a free yourself moment, is then moving directly into the house of relationships. So on the 18th, then you see a Venus-Saturn conjunction in the 3rd house. This is another interesting trend. There's so many different transits this month. Venus-Saturn in the 3rd house has a moment of make or break to it, of finality, of seriousness, of weight, gravity, beauty, age, wisdom, the goddess, time, and mortality. Venus, which represents harmony, and Saturn, which represents boundary and opposition, are coming together in a conjunction. So that usually has the feeling of coming to terms on something, an agreement, an outlined set of expectations and obligations in some kind of working relationship. It can also be about, again, those things that you feel bound to or obligated by, the force of necessity and love, the commitments and the feeling of being bound by commitments and obligations in love relationships, even with siblings again. And then thinking about that, right? Remember, that's happening just right after Mars, God of War, has entered your house of relationships. So it's a very interesting, it's such an interesting month. Like I've in all of the horoscopes I've done, I'm like so many different things happening. And meanwhile, with Uranus culminating and Mars triggering it, and triggering both Pluto and Uranus, it's like, all bets are off on doing these horoscopes. But I'm also sort of like, what the hell is going to happen? So I'd love to hear your feedback as the month goes on and hear what you guys are actually experiencing. February 18th, the planet Chiron changes signs, bumps into Aries. It'll move into your 6th house, where again, Chiron is a planet that doesn't change signs all that often. Next month, Uranus is going to change signs into Taurus. That doesn't happen all that often. Big outer planets moving signs right now. Chiron going into Aries is going into a Mars ruled sign. That's, again, a sign that you have a lot in common with. The emphasis on Chiron and Aries in the 6th house is going to have a lot to do with health. It's going to have a lot to do with hardships and how you handle difficulties in life. It's going to have a lot to do with themes of power and competition and conflict in relationships and the healing work that you need to do around those things. And Chiron in the 6th house is also potentially about the things that you want to give yourself in service to, and the natural healing wisdom that you may have, or that you may be ready to put to work in the world somewhere. It's there for the better part of the next decade. So Chiron's work in the 6th house, which is related to both sickness and service, may take you through a journey related to your own health, or it may put you in service to others who are suffering. But the themes of sickness and suffering and service are going to be pronounced for a while now. And a lot of wisdom coming in around those themes right now as well. So this makes sense. You've had the planet Uranus, a planet of great rebellion and change, and a planet that has been more unsettling in the 6th house for 7 to 8 years. Now, Chiron's entering, and in some ways you're ready to reap what's been sown, to do some deeper healing work now, and to sort of see the crystallization of insights and wisdom around things that you've been learning. The 6th house was traditionally called the joy of Mars, and it was related to military service. So also the things that you feel are worth fighting for, and those things that really aren't worth your time or energy. Those distinctions, and you're going to become a lot wiser about those distinctions and how to use your time and energy wisely, what fights to have and what fights not to have. Those things are going to become very important for you. And also, again, the sort of deeper, becoming a little bit wiser and more know-how, more wisdom, being able to take the experiences of conflict that you've had in your past and put those things to work in the world a little bit more. Like a seasoned veteran knows how to pick their fights and is good in the right kind of fight. It has that feeling to it. All right, so I am by no means a Chiron expert, so I'm doing my best here with Chiron. But Chiron enters Aries on February 18th. And then on February 19th, there is a full moon in the sign of Virgo. So you're going to see this, for example, right about February 19th, even into the 20th. And that takes place in your 11th house, which is a place that's related to friends and groups, allies and colleagues. So a lot of emphasis on those themes right around February 19th and 20th. At the exact same time, Mercury will be conjoining with Neptune. And so you want to be really careful, because this is a moment that you're going to have to be really discerning. The need to be as discerning and rational as possible, especially around groups and colleagues and opportunities for collaboration, who you're taking help from or who you're giving your help or time to. It's very important, because Mercury with Neptune can really get lost in daydreams and fantasies and delusion. And both houses, 11 and 5, have to do with The 11th was called the house of good spirit. The 5th was called the place of good fortune. They both have to do with good things coming into our lives. But Mercury, Neptune can lack discernment and can lunge for something shiny right now, that may actually not be entirely healthy. So you want to be as discerning as possible around this transit, especially about who or what you take help from or what you accept in terms of favorable things coming your way that may not actually be good for you. For example, it could be sort of really, really simple idea. You're at dinner some night. Someone says, "Hey, should we get dessert?" And you're in a good mood, and so you think, "Sure, I'll get dessert." And so you eat a bunch of ice cream or something. It's kind of late at night. Ice cream ends up keeping you up till 2 a.m. You have barely any sleep the next morning, and you have a job interview, right? It's the simple little things that look good, but that a judgment, a kind of getting lost or swept up in things can easily spiral us into a bad situation. So you want to be careful around sort of getting lost or swept up in things that look good or feel good, but may not actually be good for you around the full moon this month, around February 19th and 20th. All right, so that's a little bit of advice for that one. Then on February 22nd, last but not least, here's a Venus-Pluto conjunction. So the Venus-Pluto conjunction, again in the third house, the impact of relationships and communication in relationships, important events related to siblings, and the conversations about what you feel bound or obligated to. I think, again, that's a huge part of this month with the Venus-Saturn, Venus-Pluto dynamic in your third house. What you feel emotionally or mentally obligated to, like what occupies a lot of your head space, what occupies a lot of your heart space, what you feel like, I owe this person, there's a certain expectation that I be or act or behave in a certain way. Venus in Capricorn's a lot more conscious about those kinds of things. But her encounter with Pluto here may represent a moment where you say, wait, I don't know if that's who I am. I don't know if I want to be obligated to this or to that, or it's a change of mind and potentially a deep conversation that needs to be had about expectations in relationships. So that's how I'm looking at that transit for you on the 22nd. That's really the last big one of the month. So I'll look forward to hearing how this goes. I'd love to hear your comments, or if you feel like sending me an email, nightlightastrology@gmail.com. And then I will be back again next month. We'll see you for the month of March. Okay, take care. Bye.